This movie is about a guy who's mad at other people or celebrating something he doesn't care about like a weirdo. It's called When the Scrooge Finesse Nativity, and it's okay I guess. I don't even know if I ever really watched this from front to back as a fetus, but if I did, I'm sure it wasn't that important, cause it didn't leave enough of an impact for me to remember. But you guys requested this, and also it's okay, cause it's not constantly trying to make me laugh, like some of the other trash ass movies I've gone over this year. I mean, not that this movie's actually heat or anything, I just like how it's just a movie for the clan to enjoy, so it doesn't have to go out of its way to impress you. So it starts out with the narrator describing the location, and he feels the need to rhyme in every sentence for some reason. Then the story takes place in the cuts, so like everyone is a mutated imp, and they're all fanned out over Christmas, even though they wouldn't even have human rights in the real world, so I don't know how they come in contact with the holiday. Everyone is going around shopping and doing too much, and there's one guy whose daughter has something to say about the culture. Then there's some guy who lives even deeper in the cuts, who's watching everyone else tweak from afar, so 4 youths climb up his crib because they feel the need to disturb another nigga. It's one of the guys called the Scrooge, and the youths think he's some sort of unclean spirit, so the Scrooge is tired of these smacks teenagers going out of their way to annoy him, so he pops out the crib and gets them to retreat, but it turns out that was actually him. It was just his dog and a giant art piece or something. The Scrooge reveals himself and he's down egregious, like he has rotten food and is cleaning himself the ends that he just ate, like he needs to be committed, but he decides it's time for the get back against the other imps for having the youths invade his property. So he rolls into town just doing niggas dirty and trying to incite as much suffering as possible until the 4 youths get back and false claim they were touched by the Scrooge, which causes everyone to feel some type of way, cause I guess an entire town was getting pressed by one man, like a commune of pussies. So the king sets aside the guy with the daughter to talk to him about how Christmas is important and that he hopes those youths didn't go to mess with the Scrooge, cause it turns out the male youths are actually this guy's sons too. So the guy has to cover for his worthless sons and say they were just tweaking, but the sons are still in the back trying to sell the bag for him, like give it up, but he manages to convince the king that the Scrooge isn't a problem, so that's cool. Then later on, the daughter asks the guy who the Scrooge is, and he tells her that he's some bum waste the holiday for some reason, and it shows the Scrooge messing with other people's gifts like a psycho. When the daughter pulls up on him, he gets her out of the way, but when she's about to get turned into a pack, he tries to abandon her, so his dog gets on his ass to save her, which he does. But when the daughter gets saved, she shows appreciation, which makes the Scrooge feel some type of way, because he has to keep up appearances with being an op, so he ends up robbing her up again, and then the dad finds her and feels lit, cause he thinks she was practicing gift robbing, whatever. But now the daughter thinks the Scrooge might not be an unclean spirit after all, so the guy and the daughter go back home to see the wife putting up decorations, and she's doing it cause she's heard that her neighbor is superior to her, but whatever, this is a pointless story element. Once he gets inside, the guy gets a call from someone trying to waste his time, and it turns out to be the Scrooge doing the most as usual, but he decides to call it a day and go back to his crib. So he and the dog go back to the cuts, where they get toxic waste dumped on them, and because he's a psycho, he's feeling himself about getting it. Then there's a scene where the daughter's singing a song about Christmas or something. It cuts back to the Scrooge at his crib, and he's doing whatever, like making sure his soul is non-existent, or getting into arguments with his own echo, and I guess the point is that he is lonely, but that's on him. Then it shows the daughter going to 2 random fossil women to ask them about how the Scrooge was when he was a fetus, and they tell her about how all fetuses come from the sky, and the first example they give is a nigga with a hoe for a wife, but that's irrelevant. Back to the Scrooge, he came in some basket like a minute ago, but everyone was busy at the kickback, so they just let him out to shiver like some ops. When they finally found him, it turns out he's some possessed fetus, and he's eating plates and hating on Nicholas the Saint, like it's not a good look, but still, at this point in time to let him live. It turns out some girl had a hard on for him in class, and he had a hard on for her, and now that she's grown, she's telling the daughter the story, but she's not trying to let it be known that she ever wanted him. Also, it turns out the king is her husband, but he's fretting about how it went down, like as if he wasn't fucking over the Scrooge constantly when they were in school. Eventually, the Scrooge talks to the girl, and she tells him that she likes Christmas colors, so his green matches, and not because of some legs, he all of a sudden likes a holiday he used to hate. So he spends a minute getting everything ready for Christmas, and when it's time for the gifts in school, he's wearing a bag over himself, and he gets pressed by the king as a fetus, you know, cause he was always on his ass back then. Then the teacher gets on his ass too, makes him take off the bag, but he's obviously still not trying to show his face, and like a typical teacher, she shows no respect for her students, and forces him to show himself. Then it turns out he tried to shave and messed up, so he gets flamed by everyone, and goes fighting and messed up the whole class. Then retreats to the mountain where he stays at now. So now the Scrooge is an adult, and he's still hurt over what happened like a grip ago, like get over it. Then it's time for the festivities, and it turns out there's some position that has to be given to someone, so we'll call it the Christmas guy. The daughter nominates the Scrooge to be the Christmas guy, but the king isn't trying to do all that, because he was trying to be the one running the show, so he and the daughter are forced to publicly debate the scripture, until the king finally decides to let Scrooge be the Christmas guy. But if he doesn't show up, then the king gets to take over, and he thinks the Scrooge doesn't have the testicles to show up anyway, so he's not worried. All the festivities at the town are feeling the Scrooge in his feelings, because he's not trying to hear all that, and he does the most in order to drown it out with his own nonsense. So the daughter pulls up on the Scrooge and tells him that he should be the Christmas guy, but he spends a good minute embarrassing himself, trying to look scary to her, but he just ends up making himself look even weaker, so that's an L. It's another daughter wants the Scrooge to be the Christmas guy, cause she too isn't really feeling the holiday, and I guess she needs reassurance from some rando to rekindle the feeling. Then she tells him that if he goes he'll get an award, which is enough to change everything, cause he knows he can rub his dick all over the king's face, so he tells the daughter he'll be there, but when he leaves, he starts having second thoughts like a pussy, and becomes indecisive, so the Christmas dance has started, and the king announced the Christmas guy, but he doesn't show up, so he assumes the position instead. Meanwhile, the Scrooge is going through it because he can't decide if he wants to go or not. So his real-ass dog makes the decision for him and evicts him from the crib, and he interrupts the king while he's stroking himself and lands where the party is. So the Scrooge comes in to get the award, and everyone's already afraid of him, like they think he should be in the back of the bus or something. The king tells them that before they can get the award, he has to do a whole bunch of relevant nonsense first, like tasting the food and moving his body, which at first makes him feel like he's at Guantanamo, but then he does some race against some fetuses and takes a W for the first time in his life, which has him feeling lit. Then when it's time for the awards to be given, the king pulls another delay out of his ass and says it's time to exchange gifts, and the Scrooge gets a razor because niggas are trying to joke on him for how he went out as a fetus, and it gets the whole town on him as if they weren't just pissing themselves over his presence like the same night. Then the king proposes to his wife and offers her a whip he got out of public funds because he's corrupt, and the Scrooge violates it. Then goes on about how the holiday is all about presents and greed and not anything actually worth respect, and he starts tweaking and shaves the king, and then goes around town ruining the Christmas tree and other things, which causes everyone to go into a panic again over just one nigga, and he finesses a whip from two dwarves just to waste time with it until he ends up crashing it and has to do the dash before it blows up. Then the entire town is feeling step away about the fact they let the Scrooge mess up their entire block, and the king blames the daughter for what happened, so she's hurt, but it turns out they had another tree just lying over there, so really it's whatever. And from the cuts, the Scrooge sees that the little stunt he pulled didn't really do anything, so he's hurt. When he goes to his crib, he sees that his own dog is trying to celebrate Christmas, which gets him hurt and makes him throw out the dog because he's that pressed over it. Then he decides that it wasn't enough to ruin the festivities, so he has to actually make sure Christmas isn't a thing anymore. So there's some scene where the classic Scrooge song plays in the background while he pretends to be Father Christmas and recreates the sleigh. When that's done, he tries to look for some deer to finesse, but the real Nicholas already has that covered, so instead, he makes the dog the deer and goes out on the block with the sleigh, which can actually fly by itself, so he should have been an engineer or something, but it's not flying right at first, so he's thinking he's gonna be on a shirt until the sleigh chills out and he can actually fly it properly. So he breaks in and enters one crib and sets some bum-ass moths for their stockings, then uses a vacuum to finesse their presents. As if that wasn't enough, he starts finessing their food too, and the daughter comes downstairs for something and sees the Scrooge, but she thinks it's Nicholas, even though he has green hands, and she starts asking questions like she's the FBI or something, and he asks to come up with something to get her off the case. Then she tries to call a plea for the Scrooge to Santa, which makes the Scrooge think the girl's actually not wicked, but that's not enough for him to not finesse her and go around making life worse for everybody else. He goes around the entire block taking what he wants and finesses the king's wife's ring and makes the king kiss his dog's ass in his sleep. Then there's some scene of him finessing other people's stuff until he's finally done everyone dirty and decides to retreat into a sleigh, but it's not working because the gas is empty. So he has his dog carry him up the mountain so he can see all the imps whine because their presents are gone. So that morning, everyone wants to jump because they see they've been finessed, and it's so bad for the king because the Scrooge tried his best to the 12 whip, which has him flying across town. Then the king gets heated over the fact that the Scrooge was there and again gets on the daughter's ass for inviting him, but her dad sticks up for her and says he's actually cool with what the Scrooge did because all he needs is his family, and I guess women's opinion is enough to change the sentiment in this whole shape ass town, and they all decide they're okay with being victims of property crime. So the girl calls out to the Scrooge and he thinks the block is devastated, but he sees them still celebrating Christmas, which makes him realize the holiday is more than just revenue for corporations, and he starts to care for some reason, then tries to stop the presents from falling off the cliff, but he isn't strong enough, so it looks like an L. But then he sees the daughter on top because she didn't want to be alone, and all of a sudden he has the strength to carry the sleigh. With that, the Scrooge and the girl roll through town with the presents and almost get the dad out of the way, but he stops the sleigh from hitting the tree. Then the Scrooge confesses to finessing everyone to 12, but he says sorry, which means any and all felonies and misdemeanors have to be forgiven, but the king is still hurt over it. Then the wife comes through and says she's divorcing him to be with the Scrooge instead, so now the Scrooge really flaying himself. The movie ends with the Scrooge and the rest of the town celebrating Christmas like they already were, and having a guilt time back at the Scrooge's crib. Overall, this movie was ass, but it was okay because it wasn't meant to be taken seriously anyway. Let me know what other movies you want me to watch, and the moral of the story is that if you get hoed in public as a fetus, at least wait for more encounters in the block before you write them all off as ops, cause that makes you out to be the one doing too much.
Okay guys, make sure that when you subscribe you hit the notification button because that lets you know whenever I make a new video, and as always, thanks for watching.